الحمد لله رب العالمين وأصلي وأسلم على من بعث رحمة للعالمين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين وبعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Inshallah, we continue with the tafsir of Surah Nisa from ayah number 22 inshallah this week. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has been explaining and describing some of the wrong practices of Jahiliyyah, pre-Islam, before Islam, especially with regards to women, which we covered in previous weeks. So this week, and in these few ayahs, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the first ayah, 22, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will flag up another wrong practice, evil practice that used to happen in the Jahiliyyah, and He will prohibit that practice. As we said, Surah An-Nisa, it's about women, as in the name, An-Nisa means women, because many of the ahkam in the surah, many of the guidance is regarding how to deal with, interact with, the relationship with different sets of women in the community. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins this ayah, 22, by saying, وَلَا تَنْكِحُوا مَا نَكَحَ آبَاؤُكُم مِّنَ النِّسَاءِ إِلَّا مَا قَدْ سَلَفَ إِنَّهُ كَانَ فَاحِشَةً وَمَقْتًا وَسَاءَ سَبِيلًا. Do not marry former wives of your fathers except what was done previously. It was indeed a shameful, despicable and evil practice. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins with a prohibition, with a nahi, that do not marry the former wives of your fathers. We said a few weeks ago that one of the practices of the Jahiliyyah, of the days of ignorance before Islam, was that they used to inherit even their father's wives, not their own mothers, but fathers' other wives and things like that. So the first prohibition here, Allah makes it clear that you are not allowed to marry a woman that your father has married. You're not allowed to marry, obviously not your mother, but another woman that your father marries. This is prohibited. This is completely haram. And here marriage means just the marriage, aqd nikah, just the contract. As long as the father has made a contract of nikah, it doesn't mean he had a relationship with her, but the contract is signed, agreed, that is the woman you cannot marry, because your father has already married her legally. Even if he didn't consummate the marriage, even if they didn't have relationship, and then he divorced her, you're still not allowed to marry that woman who your father has married. This is very clear. Ibn Jarir recorded that Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma, he said that during the time of Jahiliyyah, the people used to prohibit what Allah prohibits concerning marriage, except marrying the stepmother and taking two sisters at the same time. So Ibn Abbas is saying, during the times of Jahiliyyah, mostly the people used to follow whatever came later in Islam, except for two things. They used to marry their stepmother, meaning a wife that their father had taken, and they used to sometimes have two sisters as wives together at the same time. Then Allah sent down this ayah prohibiting the women whom your fathers married, etc., and obviously not combining two sisters together at the same time in a marriage. Similar was reported from Ata and Qatada. So this is agreed upon, this is prohibited for the ummah. Two things in this ayah is mentioned. One is, do not marry the wives or former wives of your father except what was done previously. It was indeed a shameful, despicable and evil practice. The second part of not combining two women will come later, inshallah, in the following ayahs. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls this act of marrying the former wives of the father, he says, إِنَّهُ كَانَ فَاحِشَةً وَمَقْتًا وَسَاءَ سَبِيلًا. Indeed, it was a shameful and maqta, and the evil way. Maqtan is a hated thing, something which is very extremely hateful or hated thing, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, fahisha is obviously something shameful, you know, a shameful act. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in other ayahs, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا الزِّنَا إِنَّهُ كَانَ فَاحِشَةً وَسَاءَ سَبِيلًا. And come not near unlawful sexual relations. Verily it is a fahisha, a shameful and evil way. In Surah number 17, ayah number 32. Here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala added the word maqta. He said fahisha and sa'a sabila. It's a shameful deed and it leads to an evil way, but he added one extra word, which is it's a maqtan, meaning it's hateful, offensive, and what they said maqtan means it brings on the anger, the wrath, extreme anger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on whoever does this act. Yeah? Whoever does this act, it brings the extreme anger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on that person. So Ata ibn Rabah, he said, explaining this word, he said it means Allah will hate him, and wasa'a sabila, and it is an evil way for those who take this way. Whoever does this thing, he's taken an evil path. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he will be a hated person in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then the next ayah continues to explain which other types of women are haram for you in marriage. Which other types of women? So the first one, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala banned something which was practiced in the days of Jahiliyyah, which is marrying the stepmother, the former wife of one's father. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this ayah gives us a list of women who we're not allowed to marry. They are mahram to us. We're not allowed to marry. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues, He says, حُرِّمَتْ عَلَيْكُمْ أُمَّهَاتُكُمْ وَبَنَاتُكُمْ وَأَخَوَاتُكُمْ وَعَمَّاتُكُمْ وَخَالَاتُكُمْ وَبَنَاتُ الْأَخِ وَبَنَاتُ الْأُخْتِ وَأُمَّهَاتُكُمُ اللَّاتِي أَرْضَعْنَكُمْ وَأَخَوَاتُكُمْ مِنَ الرَّضَاعَةِ وَأُمَّهَاتُ نِسَائِكُمْ وربائبكم اللاتي في حجوركم من نسائكم اللاتي دخلتم بهن فإن لم تكونوا دخلتم بهن فلا جناح عليكم وحلائل أبنائكم الذين من أصلابكم وأن تجمعوا بين الأختين إلا ما قد سلف إن الله كان غفورا رحيما. So here's a long list of all the women that men are not allowed to marry in Islam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, also forbidden to you for marriage are your mothers, your daughters, your sisters, your paternal and maternal aunts, your brothers, daughters, your sisters' daughters. And then, so there's 7 there that are related to you through blood. These are haram for you to marry. And your foster mothers, meaning a woman who has breastfed you, become a milk mother or a wet nurse to you. And your foster sisters, meaning a woman who was breastfed from the same mother that you were breastfed. Your foster sisters or your mothers-in-law, your stepdaughters under your guardianship, if you have consummated marriage with their mothers. But if you have not, then you can marry them. Nor the wives of your own sons, nor 2 sisters together at the same time, except what was done previously. Surely Allah is all forgiving, most merciful. So here, as Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma, he said that 7 degrees of blood relation and 7 degrees of marriage relation are prohibited for marriage. He then recited this ayah. So I already mentioned the first 7. These are women related to you by blood, you're not allowed to marry. What are the 7? Your mothers, your daughters, your sisters, your father's sisters, your mother's sisters, your brother's daughters, meaning your nieces, your sister's daughters, your nieces from your sister's side. So these are the 7 blood relations that is haram for you to marry. They are haram on you, they are mahram. So Allah's statement then follows after these 7, there's a few which are related to you not by blood, but by breastfeeding, milk mothers, foster mothers, or sisters. So Allah said, وَأُمَّهَاتُكُمُ اللَّاتِ أَرْضَعْنَكُمْ وَأَخَوَاتُكُمْ مِنَ الرَّضَاعَةِ. In the same ayah, means just as your mother who bore you is prohibited, like your real mother is haram for you. Similar, if you as a baby was breastfed by another woman, she is also like your mother. She's haram for you to marry. Same, and this is based on the hadith of, well, not based on, but there's an extra evidence for this in the hadith as well. Aisha radiallahu anha, mother of the faithful, she said that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Inna rada'a tuharrimu ma tuharrimul wilada." Suckling, meaning breastfeeding, prohibits what birth prohibits. This is in Bukhari, in Muslim, something similar. يَحْرُمُ مِنَ الرَّضَعَةِ مَا يَحْرُمُ مِنَ النَّسَبِ. Breastfeeding establishes prohibited degrees just as blood does. Meaning, as soon as you have a woman or mother who breastfed you, she becomes like your mother in terms of relations. Same with a foster sister, etc., who has breastfed from the same mother. Also, the mother-in-law, wife's mother, and also stepdaughter are prohibited in marriage. Stepdaughter is who's your wife's daughter from another husband or previous husband. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the same ayah, وَأُمَّهَاتُ نِسَائِكُمْ وَرَبَائِبِكُمُ اللَّاتِ فِي حُجُورِكُمْ مِن نِسَائِكُمْ اللَّاتِ دَخَلْتُمْ بِهِنَّ فَإِن لَمْ تَكُونُوا دَخَلْتُمْ بِهِنَّ فَلَا جُنَاحَ عَلَيْكُمْ. Your mother-in-laws, your stepdaughters under your guardianship, if you have consummated the marriage with their mothers, but if you have not, then you can marry them. So the mother of the wife, she becomes prohibited in marriage, just like your own mother. And for her son-in-law, when the marriage is conducted, whether or not the son-in-law has sexual relations with her daughter or not. So as soon as the marriage is conducted, mother-in-law becomes haram, vice versa. So in this ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned mother-in-law and then stepdaughters who are under your guardianship. This is not a condition that they have to be under your guardianship, but just any stepdaughter becomes haram for you if you have consummated the marriage with the mother of that daughter. So stepdaughter of a wife that you have consummated the marriage, meaning you've done nikah, the contract is done, and you've had sexual intercourse with her, you've had sexual relations with her, then her daughter from another husband is haram for you, is not allowed to. But if the man divorces the mother before having sexual relations with her, he is allowed to marry her daughter. And then the ayah continues, وَحَلَائِلُ أَبْنَائِكُمُ الَّذِينَ مِنْ أَصْلَابِكُمْ وَأَن تَجْمَعُوا بَيْنَ الْأُخْتَيْنِ إِلَّا مَا قَدْ سَلَفَ إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ غَفُورًا رَحِيمًا. Nor the wives of your sons, your daughter-in-laws, the wives of your sons, of your real sons, from your loins, your proper sons, not adopted or anything like that. They are not allowed. The wives of your sons, you cannot marry them. وَأَن تَجْمَعُوا بَيْنَ الْأُخْتَيْنِ إِلَّا مَا قَدْ سَلَفَ. Nor two sisters together at the same time. You cannot marry two sisters at the same time together. You cannot marry. If you're married to one sister, her sister is not allowed for you to marry whilst you're married to the first sister, right? So two sisters at the same time cannot be married to the same man. Simple as that. If you divorce one sister, then you can marry the other sister. It's not a problem. But having two sisters, being married to two sisters at the same time, this is what is prohibited. Inna Allah kana ghafura rahima. He's all forgiving, most merciful, as in what was done in the past before Islam. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the next ayah continues, وَالْمُحْصَنَاتُ مِنَ النِّسَاءِ إِلَّا مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ كِتَابَ اللَّهِ عَلَيْكُمْ وَأُحِلَّ لَكُمْ مَا وَرَاءَ ذَلِكُمْ أَن تَبْتَغُوا بِأَمْوَالِكُمْ مُحْصِنِينَ غَيْرَ مُسَافِحِينَ فَمَا اسْتَمْتَعْتُمْ بِهِ مِنْهُنَّ فَآتُوهُنَّ أُجُورَهُنَّ فَرِيضَةً وَلَا جُنَاحَ عَلَيْكُمْ فيما تراضيتم به من بعد الفريضة إن الله كان عليما حكيما. Also forbidden are married women except female captives in your possession. This is Allah's commandment to you. Lawful to you are all beyond these, as long as you seek them with your wealth in a legal marriage, not in fornication. Give those you have consummated marriage with their due mahar, due dowries. It is permissible to be mutually gracious regarding the set dowry. Surely Allah is all-knowing, all-wise. So here a number of rules are mentioned. The first one is, apart from the list that was mentioned above, who else is haram to marry? Any married woman. Any married woman is haram for you to marry. وَالْمُحْصَنَاتُ مِنَ النِّسَاءِ. Any other married woman is haram for you to marry. You cannot marry, obviously, a woman who is already married. And the word here used for a married woman, muhsanat, right? It comes from a word which literally means that someone is protected, right? Hisn is a fortress. Hisn, you have the booklet, Hisnul Muslim, fortress of the believer. Same word. Muhsin, muhsanat, it means the one who's married, they're inside a fortress. They are protected. They are defended. They're in a stronghold. So the marriage for the person is a protection, is like being in a fortress. So they're called muhsanat. In the Qur'an, this word comes for 4 different meanings. Whenever muhsanat is mentioned, or this word muhsinin in that form, or different forms, but the word muhsin or muhsan, there's 4 meanings in the Qur'an that this word is used for. First one is marriage. Like in the ayah, in this ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَالْمُحْصَنَاتُ مِنَ النِّسَاءِ. In this ayah, the meaning is those who are married. So the first meaning of ihsan is marriage, right? The one who's muhsan or muhsin is the one who's married. The second meaning it comes for is Islam. Sometimes it's used as the meaning of Islam. Like in the ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَإِذَا أَحْصِنَّ أَيْ أَسْلَمْنَ يُقَالْ أَحْصَنَ إِذَا أَسْلَمَ. So sometimes this word can mean Islam. So 2 meanings so far. One is marriage. Another one in the Qur'an is used to denote the meaning of Islam, to surrender. Another meaning is al-iffa. So in the ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, muhsinina ghayra musafihin. This is in this ayah or next ayah, 25. No, it's in this ayah as well. Muhsinina ghayra musafihin. So here, iffa means chaste. Someone who protects their chastity. Somebody who's chaste, somebody who's decent, pious, as in relation to not having relations with the opposite sex. They are chaste. Yeah, muhsanat here means they are chaste. So that's the third meaning, al-iffa, from this word, ihsan. The fourth meaning is al-hurriya. It means the free woman, the free believing woman, right? The one who's free, not a slave, right? This is also used in the Qur'an. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَنْ لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ مِنْكُمْ طَوْلًا أَن يَنْكِحَ الْمُحْصَنَاتِ. This is same surah, Nisa, the next ayah, 25. That if you can't marry, if you don't have the means to marry a free believing woman, a free woman. So muhsanat here means a free woman, not a slave woman. So this word ihsan or muhsan, muhsanat, it comes for four meanings. First one is marriage, second one is Islam, third one is chastity, fourth one is hurriya in the Qur'an. But here it's come for the meaning of marriage, and as we said, the word itself means someone who is protected, is in a fortress. So this is the symbol of marriage. If somebody is married, they are like being in a fortress because they're protected from other desires, they're protected from falling into haram, they're protected in so many ways, not just sexual relations, that as well, of course, that's the key protection. But in many ways, the person is protected. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues, وَأُحِلَّ لَكُم مَّا وَرَاءَ ذَلِكُمْ أَن تَبْتَغُوا بِأَمْوَالِكُمْ مُحْصِنِينَ غَيْرَ مُسَافِحِينَ. And lawful to you are all beyond these, meaning the list that was mentioned, the mothers, the daughters, the stepmothers, all these lists, the former wives of your fathers, all of this list, two sisters in the same time, and married women, anything beyond this list, anything beyond what was mentioned, these are all, the rest are lawful for you, halal for you. With one condition, أن تبتغوا بأموالكم محسنين غير مسافحين. As long as you seek them with your wealth for or in a legal marriage, not in fornication. As long as you seek them with your wealth in a legal marriage, not in fornication. It means that the description of women unlawful for marriage is there above in those ayahs, is there to divert you, to induce you to look for lawful women. Stay away from these unlawful women. You're not allowed to marry these women. These are the list, they're haram for you. Therefore, with your wealth, seek those women who are lawful for you, halal for you. All of the women except for the ones that are mentioned, or except for those who fall under those categories, with the help of your wealth, and enter into marriage with them. This should be clear to us that we cannot seek with our wealth. Wealth means because you pay the mahr, right, for marriage. Nobody should be using their wealth except for when they seek to have relations with women in marriage, in a legal contract. It should be with that purpose and goal, that I'm going to get married for the sake of seeking a lawful, permanent marriage with this woman, lawful, right? Seeking to protect her, protect yourself. This should be the goal. Not seeking to chase after your lust and desire by entering into unlawful marriages or illegal marriages. And there are different forms of illegal marriages, or even without marriage, chasing or having relations with women, with your wealth, seeking women to have illegal marriages, right? Or not even marriages, illegal relations. This is what is haram, this is what is not allowed. The word used, أن تبتغوا بأموالكم محسنين, to seek with your wealth in legal marriage, محسنين غير مسافحين, not in fornication. مسافحين is literally to allow your water or seeds to be just wasted anywhere. You're not allowed to do that, not in fornication, not outside of the legal marriage. Because you may hear some people not, usually in our communities, but you may hear the concept of temporary marriage and things like that, mut'ah and things like that. This is not allowed. Temporary marriage where two people say, we're going to get married for 1 week, we're going to get married for 2 days, we're going to get married for 1 month. Haram. This is not marriage contract. You cannot specify a time in the contract. As soon as you do that, this is not a nikah. This is seeking unlawful relations with your wealth. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues in this ayah, فَمَا اسْتَمْتَعْتُمْ بِهِ مِنْهُنَّ فَآتُوهُنَّ أُجُورَهُنَّ فَرِيضَةً وَلَا جُنَاحَ عَلَيْكُمْ فِيمَا تَرَاضَيْتُمْ بِهِ مِنْ بَعْدِ الْفَرِيضَةِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ عَلِيمًا حَكِيمًا. Give those you have consummated marriage with their due dowries, the mahar. Give that mahar. It is permissible to be mutually gracious regarding the set dowry. Surely Allah is all-knowing, all-wise. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is reminding the believers, which came in other ayahs about the mahar. It's very important, as we mentioned a couple of weeks ago. It's a condition of marriage. And especially when the marriage has been consummated, it becomes a due. You have to give that. You can't withhold that mahar. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is exhorting the believers to pay the mahar, pay the dowry, once you have consummated the marriage. But also Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds you that if you mutually agree, to give extra or to reduce something of the mahar, and both parties agree, that's fine as well. There is flexibility, but that's if both parties agree. Someone can give you more extra as a gift. You may decide mutually that you want to reduce the mahar, and she forgives you for that part. That's also fine, as long as it's not coerced or forced or pressurized or anything like that. It's mutually agreed. And surely Allah is all-knowing, all-wise. Allah knows what is your intention in seeking that relationship, seeking that contract of marriage. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows if you're negotiating on the mahar, whether it's done mutually, are both parties happy with it, or did you force them, did you shame them into it, did you use some other means to take advantage and pay less of the mahar, etc. So Allah is all-knowing, all-wise. And He's all-knowing, all-wise, He's Hakim, because in who He has allowed for believers to marry and who He has prohibited believers from marrying. Allah knows what is best for society, what is best for families, what is best for relations, what is best for communities. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows this and has given us very detailed guidance in terms of just this basic thing of who you can marry, who you can't. And this is not something small. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us in precise details. There's no gray area. There's no this person, I'm not sure what it says in the Qur'an or Sunnah. I don't know if we can marry this person or not. No, every single person has been spoken for. It's very clear who is haram for you to marry. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't leave anything in doubt. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us this detailed rulings of marital relations, who you can marry, who you can't, which women are halal for you, which women are haram for you. And this is the thing people struggle with in societies. Once you get rid of, if you don't have a source of guidance for morality, an objective outside source, a divine source, then how do you decide which women are halal for you, which women are haram for you? There's no way you can decide through just using the intellect or rational powers. It's impossible. So alhamdulillah, praise be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who has guided us in every detail of life. This is the ni'mah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the guidance of the Qur'an. Then this ayah is a bit long, but it's fairly quick because it's not something, some parts of it is not relevant today, so we'll just read it inshallah. وَمَنْ, in the next ayah number 25, وَمَنْ لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ مِنْكُمْ طَوْلًا أَنْ أن ينكح المحصنات المؤمنات فمما ملكت أيمانكم من فتياتكم المؤمنات والله أعلم بإيمانكم بعضكم من بعض فانكحوهن بإذن أهلهن وآتوهن أجورهن بالمعروف محصنات غير مسافحات ولا متخذات أخدان فإذا أحصن فإن أتين بفاحشة فعليهن نصف ما على المحصنات من العذاب ذلك لمن خشي العنة منكم وأن تصبروا خير لكم والله غفور رحيم. But if any of you cannot afford to marry a free believing woman, then let him marry a believing bondswoman possessed by one of you. Allah knows best the state of your faith and theirs. You are from one another, so marry them with the permission of their owners, giving them their mahar, dowry, in fairness. If they are chaste, neither promiscuous nor having secret affairs. If they commit indecency after marriage, they receive half the punishment of free women. This is for those of you who fear falling into sin. But if you are patient, it is better for you, and Allah is all forgiving, most merciful. So here, there was a concession for believers. In those days, this doesn't apply anymore. There's no slavery now. In those days where slavery was prevalent, it was common. If somebody couldn't afford to marry a free believing woman, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave the concession of marrying a slave or a slave that they owned, whatever. It's not relevant anymore for us, not in our societies today. And so Allah is just saying that, you can marry, so even when it comes to a slave, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that it should be somebody who's chaste, not promiscuous, right? And then the ayah just finishes off with that this is for those of you who fear falling into sin. So it's like a concession for somebody who is desperately in need of getting married but cannot marry, hasn't got enough money or whatever to marry a free believing woman. That's in those days, in that context, obviously. And then Allah says, but if you are patient, it is better for you. If you have sabr, it's better for you. And Allah is all forgiving, most merciful. So, inshallah, those were the few ayahs we covered, especially on marriage, in terms of what are the women that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has prohibited for us, and we went through the whole list. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala warned us as well about going into the marriage with the right intention to seek a permanent, legal, chaste, protective marriage. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exhorts us to use our wealth for that purpose and not for the purpose of following your lust and desires in unlawful and illegal relations. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq to understand His book and His ayahs and His guidance and implement those in our lives, inshallah. So we'll stop here for this week.